Okay, I'm giving myself 25 minutes to go over this. The question is, the structural failures of the World Trade Center. How did the buildings get destroyed so rapidly and completely once collapse initiated? So we're granting that structural failure began. So how did the rest of the building get destroyed so rapidly and completely? So let's start with Wikipedia. So, collapse of the World Trade Center. This is what it looked like. That's after the Tower 2 collapsed, and then it's exploding into debris. So how did it happen? It's been called the most infamous paradigm of progressive collapse. Structural components were severed, releasing gravitational energy that transferred loads downwards by way of serially propagating impact forces. Accepting the top floors of the building, which would not have released sufficient gravitational energy to bring about a total collapse, the collapses could have begun with the failure of any story. So I followed this link, and this will show us something interesting. The towers collapsed symmetrically, more or less straight down, though there was some tilting on the tops of the towers, and a significant amount of fallout to the sides, 80%. As the collapse progressed, dust and debris could be seen shooting out of the windows several floors below the advancing destruction, caused by a sudden rush of air compressed under it, descending upper levels. No source. Total progressive collapse. When the columns failed, entire building above fell onto the first intact floor. So there's a lot of columns. This is a repeat of Bizant's NIST. So let's go here, back to here. This is going to be my video, and I'm trying to put a bunch in the time I have. So regarding the question, so these towers were not, hit by 100 airplanes. Each tower was hit by an airplane, and we'll even grant that the damage zone will grant total destruction, or more, a generous amount of destruction. And there's an intact upper section and an intact, undamaged lower section. The columns used got thicker as you progress lower. Here's a pretty nice image of the columns, core columns, perimeter columns. So the question is, how did the buildings? The issue is how fast and how complete they were destroyed once collapse began. So we're granting that this was enough to initiate collapse. Let's just stick with the official things. Look, I was even on Wikipedia instead of Wikispooks. Like, what is the explanation? What the experts say? And we'll exclude conspiracy experts, even though there's a lot. What is, we're trying to steel man the gravity-driven explanation here. You could ignore this text if you want, but basically, just a little more detail before we go into what the experts say. Each tower had 240 exterior steel columns and 47 core columns, and 40 trusses per floor. So the trusses are these horizontal beams connecting the inner and outer core columns. And there's 110 floors of each of the twin towers. And here's another image of their construction. This is a different building. This is World Trade Center 7. It's one of the 3 that were totally destroyed. Also with concerning questions on how it was destroyed so rapidly and completely. This is the debris damage as estimated by NIST, and NIST says that damage did not contribute to its sudden free fall symmetrical collapse, that it was solely due to a fire induced series of failures. The World Trade Center 7 had 81 columns, 57 exterior, and 24 interior. And instead of floor trusses, they're all connected by a complex web of steel girders. Lots of steel girders. Okay, so this is setting up the question. How could, understanding this structure, you have just basically a giant intact skyscraper and another smaller skyscraper, not only smaller in terms of the size, but also thinner steel and damaged versus relatively undamaged, comparatively undamaged, since if there was fire, it will propagate up, not down. If it fell through the damage zone, which isn't just air, there's, all those columns and trusses still exist as debris, and in the worst case, how did it fall and destroy everything at near free fall speed? Not exact free fall speed, but really fast and really, rapid and total. It didn't slow down. It didn't stop. It just pile drived its way through. Does that make sense? Does that happen? Could that happen with every building? Just these buildings? Was it a design issue? How did it happen? It's not intuitive to me. It'd be nice to have a 3D simulation or model, which I haven't seen yet. So what do the experts say? Well, when people often reference what the experts say, most of them have studied the collapse initiation. We got this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. They're the heads of these organizations' efforts to provide a official account. And of course they conclude the plane damage and prolonged fire caused the start of the collapse, which, amazing. And what's crazy, and will have to be for another video, is there are huge problems with their analysis as well. A lot of omissions, a lot of assumptions, a lot of hot mess. But that's a whole other topic. They're not even addressing the question. Who is addressing the question? Well, we have this one guy, Bazant, who 2 days after the collapse made a one-dimensional, not two-dimensional, not three-dimensional, one-dimensional mathematical model of a top portion collapsing onto a bottom portion, resulting in total destruction of hypothetical chickens in a vacuum, mass hitting mass, which is just a mathematical equation, which of course has not been empirically validated and did not incorporate any structural detail. It's literally like a line hitting a line with the math numbers calculated in. And critics actually don't disagree with the calculation formulas. They're fine. The input values he uses are suspect, which will require much further detail. But basically what you're seeing here is what we have in terms of explaining how the towers were destroyed so rapidly and completely. So, question again, how did the buildings get destroyed so rapidly and completely once collapse initiated? There's an intact, undamaged portion that was subject to the top-down dynamic loads. Now, the structural resistance, meaning, resisting the top-down load, making it hard for that load to fall as quickly as gravity. We want structures to resist gravity. That's why they exist. And to resist loads, people walking on them, planes landing on them. These are calculatable. Now, in the instance of, so this is Tower 1, this is Tower 2, this is Tower 7. It was either overcome by gravity, which is the official explanation, obviously, or it was the structural resistance was artificially removed, which is the controlled demolition conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat wearing people. But that's, until we have a full explanation of this, there's certain dynamic characteristics of the collapse progression, the fact that it was rapid and that it was complete, leans or is a better alignment with the artificial removal. So once again, collapse initiation, the experts, they also claim no evidence of artificial removal, explosives, incendiaries. But later, when pressed, they admitted they never looked. It was a hand wave. Well, wasn't that. And their 10,000-page, $16 million reports are all on the initiation. The progression, as we've already went over, mathematical, theoretical, oversimplified, no structural detail. Never, not only not empirically validated, never has been. And it doesn't match the footage. His particular paper and all subsequent papers built on that are what he describes as a crush down, crush up hypothesis. In order for the crush down to occur, the intact upper section needs to remain intact throughout the collapse progression, which does not align with the footage. I'm so sick of looking at those collapses. Look at them for yourself. You'll see it explode to dust before anything even happens to the lower portion. The input values were challenged by people, the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Roland Engel did a great presentation, several hours, extremely technical, but I might be able to show some of his slides to why what his challenge is actually. So here they're extremely open with their information, unlike NIST, who still has not released the input values for their collapse sequence. But his argument, let's go all the way to where Bazant's model is. So, the design, the mass of the upper part didn't match the in-service load shown in published reports, which increases the kinetic energy by a huge factor. He excluded buckling resistance. He didn't allocate the kilogram weights for in a manner that was consistent with the weight he gave the stories below. So the conservation of momentum calculation was off. Yeah. So, it's still, he makes it 2D here to somewhat explain what the math is saying. So what should have happened using correct inputs to Bazant's model is the collapse should have arrested after 2 seconds. With actual acceleration through one story, with actual in-service load, upper section mass, conservation of momentum. What was observed right here in the footage was, in constant acceleration of velocity through the intact structure. So minimal resistance. Bazant's theoretical model is like basically free fall because, of course, he used max design load upper section, underestimated, there's a lot of we can go through the technicals here, but anyways, there's thousands of slides for this. This would take hours. I only have 10 minutes left. And there was free fall acceleration through 8 stories in World Trade Center 7, not even close to free fall, actual free fall, which is impossible given that it had 81 vertical columns. Even if you blew out half of them, it wouldn't fall symmetrically, which everyone's seen the footage of World Trade Center 7's collapse by now, hopefully.
They did use the word we're going to
destroyed by well-placed before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
So
did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
the fire department.
That's a whole other rabbit hole. I'm trying to stay focused on answering this question. How did the buildings get destroyed so rapidly and completely? It could only, in order for the structural resistance to have been overcome, it had to have been overcome by gravity, or the structural resistance of the intact portions had to be artificially removed. So as of tonight, even though I had it on my chronological timeline of peer-reviewed data, there's a lot of argumentation back and forth between experts, there's a new theory, that was introduced in 2022. It's still one-dimensional, but it goes back to a truss failure and not a column failure. And it's the first improvement on the gravity-driven side, 20 years later. And it's not just 20 years after the disaster, 20 years after Bazant's 1D model, which was introduced 2 days after the collapse of the towers. Basically, trusses are the horizontal parts and columns are the vertical parts. Now, what's funny is that both the JOM and Federal Emergency Management Agency were speculating on a truss failure mode. But that didn't match with what this private insurance agency and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is the official report, they said it was a column failure on both the World Trade Center and World Trade Center 7, or the towers and World Trade Center 7. So this peer-reviewed paper is not a controlled demolition paper, but it's also not aligned with the official accounts. So what they're saying is, the stuff falls. This is a crude drawing. It hits this, and then it fails here, and then, boom, 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 boom. I mean, that does leave the columns, which the exterior columns could have frayed out due to compression of air. But there's a lot of failure points. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is the work hasn't even begun. And as of in 2025, there's no empirically validated, there's no demonstration of the plausibility of a rapid total gravity-driven progressive collapse with a digital or scale model that 3D, not even 2D would be fine instead of this 1D bullshit. No expert has done this. There are observables that are anomalous in the footage that have not been accounted for by any official explanation. So let's go with empirical evidence, starting with observables, static and dynamic footage. The upper portion disintegrates, as you saw in the video, contrary to the 1D models. The damage pattern was asymmetric, and even the initiation was asymmetric, which has been acknowledged. There's a slight tilting at the beginning, but the continuous rapid failure was symmetrical. There wasn't one half of the building that was remaining. Like the whole thing, the whole perimeter, everything just blew out on all sides. There was a lack of measurable or detectable deceleration when the upper intact section collides with the lower intact section. There should be measurably deceleration, because if it can just accelerate freely, whereas that energy being consumed by gravity and acceleration is not being used for destructive pulverization, which was also in the footage. At the end of their destruction of the World Trade Center Twin Towers, 80% of the debris landed outside the building's footprint. With these pancake progression proposals or hypotheticals, you would have a stack. Most of the mass would be in a stack, and even if it collided on the ground, once it hit, it would be stacking as it moved down, not exploding out. And it wasn't just air that was exploding out, it was the concrete that was being pulverized in midair. And of course, this is getting into the more political side. Most of the debris was destroyed before it could be analyzed. It wasn't moved to a secure location, as standard protocol for most disasters. And it wasn't to rescue survivors, because World Trade Center 7's debris pile had no victims in it, and it was removed first. It was actually illegal evidence destruction. And in the official accounts, all the eyewitness reports of explosions were ignored. They weren't factored in. They weren't, you could say, oh, he did see and hear explosions, but that was something else. That was electrical. That was, a gas canister exploding. They were actively suppressed. So, back to the question. How did the buildings get destroyed so rapidly and completely once collapse initiated? What makes more sense to me at the moment, subject to subject to change as new information comes in? The artificial removal of the structural resistance below seems to account better intuitively for how rapid and complete the destruction was. The fact that no fire-protected steel frame structure has ever been destroyed by fire before or since, including World Trade Center 7, which was not hit by a plane, and NIST, who said that the debris damage did not contribute to the collapse. The plane impacts describe why collapse initiated. It doesn't explain why an intact upper section damaged by fire, so it should be weaker, and it's weaker in terms of the strength of the steel, would rapidly pulverize the entire intact undamaged portion. All this portion right here. Take a chunk of this, drop it on top, and everything just blows up. Is that normal? We don't have a frame of reference. Why don't we have a frame of reference? No one has generated a publicly available 3D digital or scale model of a collapse progression. It's 2025. This is not a big deal to do. I suspect the reason why it hasn't been done all these years is because what it would show is that the collapse would arrest after a few seconds if you used gravity alone. So come on, NIST, release your simulation inputs and don't hide behind legal structures to keep your science unexamined by other experts. Thank you for listening.